Devil, my friend. Fashion. Things to wear. Possibly faces covered, but more importantly, covering up the bodies. Merch. We have that now. We are very, very excited to announce that Vampire and the Devil have partnered with our friends at Rockin' Horror Apparel. They are now taking care of the actual merch, the exclusive merch for the Vampire and Devil podcast, modeled by our very sexy devil right here.
Oh, yeah.
But we have all kinds of goodies to share with you.
Got the hoodies. We got some shirts. We got some tanks coming up. We got some booty shorts. We got all the stuff you want to wear from the Vampire and Devil podcast, thanks to Rockin' Horror.
Horns up. Fangs out. All right there, ghouls and goblins, our fangs and infernos, and our beloved creeps. It is time to continue our alphabets of horror as we get into N. And, you know, there's a lot of things that are going to absolutely rule about this episode. It's going to be some absolute great conversation. And my dearest devil man, dude, you and I talked recently about Monster Squad. We're going to kind of reference Monster Squad as we get to talk about Night of the Creeps, written and directed by your guy, Mr. Decker.
Yeah, Mr. Decker. And yeah, before we get started, I only got 2 words for you, Vampire. Thrill me.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, like what's not to say about this movie? I mean, it's perfect. It's exactly what you want in an 80s movie, man. It's got camp, it's got blood, it's got nudity, it's got zombies in it, and most of all, it's got Tom fucking Atkins in it. And,
Absolutely.
of course, everybody who knows me knows I'm the hugest Halloween 3 fan.
Yep.
So anything that does anything with Tom Atkins, I'm like, fuck yeah, man. Like, I'm in love with that guy. That guy is the coolest guy ever. I've met him at a bunch of cons before. Just the coolest dude ever. Like, he's just like super, super chill, just super cool to talk to. You know what I mean? He just like treats you like, like you're his best friend. So he was like the coolest guy ever. So.
And Devil, you know that anybody who says that Halloween sucks, there's only one reason.
Yeah, that's because Tom Atkins fucked your mother. You know what I mean? So, and that's what I was saying, man. This movie here is like, it's prime Tom Atkins, man. He doesn't give a shit.
Fun.
He's just like, I'm taking names and shooting motherfuckers, and I don't care, man. I'm doing whatever I want to do.
Dude, can we like just start off with the fact that you want to talk 80s camp cheese, despite the fact that everything that you listed off is awesome. There's a really high body count in this movie, which is kind of funny actually. But can we just acknowledge the fact that right off the bat, we've got like shiny, naked, like bare ass, like testicles on legs, like starting off this movie?
Yeah, it was like, it starts off kind of weird. I mean, the funny thing about this movie is it's basically like, it's making fun of, but in a good way, of all these like different genres, the horror genre, the sci-fi genre, alien movies and stuff like that. A lot of these Roger Corman films and stuff like that. I mean, to the fact that even all the characters' names in this movie are all based off of like either horror directors or sci-fi directors. And that's, so, but yeah, I mean, it starts off with like weird aliens that are running to or chasing after another one that's got like this weird container. You don't know what's exactly what it is. And then, at one point you get to see the butts of these aliens, and it's like, they kind of reminded me of like the troll dolls back in the day, but minus the poofy hair.
No, they've got like testicles for heads instead.
Yeah. They're just like, what the hell is going on? You know what I mean? And then that one, it goes, and the alien goes and he throws, and all of a sudden, boom, goes right into, into the atmosphere of the world, and you find out it's some weird slug kind of like snail thingies in it. But the funny thing about it too is just like in another movie we've talked about, we're talking about like, this being directed by Fred Decker, who's I'm a huge fan of. Obviously, Monster Squad is probably one of my favorite movies ever. So I'm a huge fan of that. But we talked not that long ago about Killer Clowns from Outer Space, and it kind of has that same feel to it in the very beginning, where everybody's kind of making out at this make out point, and there's this meteor that all of a sudden goes and boom. And what's the boyfriend want to do? He wants to go and check it out, which is actually kind of funny too, because mentioning Killer Clowns, you got some of the actors that are in this movie. Suzanne Snyder is also in this movie for a brief minute. So you got a little Killer Clowns from Outer Space alumni. And then, obviously the main guy, other than Tom Atkins, you're going to know is going to be Jason, who everybody always knows as Rusty from European Vacation, from the Vacation movies. So I mean, you're going to have some good times with this movie, because it's got like I said, it just right off the bat, it already starts off like weird as shit, like I said, with the aliens, and then goes into this time where it's 1958 or 1959, and it's black and white, and cuts into this guy that gets out of a insane asylum and chops up a girl in the car after they're, and then boom, goes right back into color in the 80s, man. It's like, like I said, just in the 5-10 minutes of this movie, you already know what kind of movie you're ready to watch.
Oh, absolutely. And even a little bit of love too to Jill Whitlock as well, who played Cynthia, because like she has her finger on a lot of 80s like nostalgia, because while she was a small part in Weird Science, but she was still there. But I mean, she was in Porky's, she was in Mask. I mean, she was in these like very, very cool like 80s movies and stuff like that, that like if you're in to those type of, rom-coms or dramedies or however you want to look at them, like Jill was all over those movies and stuff, which I thought was super cool. But yeah, I mean, the beginning of it was weird, but also really, really funny as well, because yeah, you've got the two lovers that like make out point, and then the guy kind of like rolls up, and it's funny the way it all plays out. But this officer rolls up to basically tell these guys like, hey, look, you really shouldn't be here. There's like there's a crazy person on the loose. There's a killer on the loose. Like, you really should go. What are you doing here? And I guess it's like his ex-girlfriend or whatever. And, just kind of plays it off. And he's like, look, man, well, you got to split. And one thing I thought was kind of funny is he walks up to that car to tell them to leave. And then he does, I guess, basically keeps it professional. But then I kind of kept waiting to see him go to the other car next to them, because you can see the girl or whatever in that car looking at the interaction. So I kind of kept waiting for him to like continue on and be like, look, you guys got to go, and try, like he's supposed to be telling everybody to get out of there. But they kind of left that as something that didn't happen. But it was kind of funny all the same, because again, it does play off as I guess that weird, interaction of exes. So maybe he didn't go to the next cars because he was kind of like, well, I'm gonna get out of here. But then again, typical boyfriend fashion, and it doesn't work out. I want to be the guy that discovers this meteor. Let's go find it. But I couldn't help but laugh, because as he leaves her in the car on the side of the highway, she's listening to the radio, realizes that like she is right in the area of where the news broadcast said this killer would be. Boyfriend, or Mr. Right Now or whatever, is off trying to find the meteor, which he did. And then she's being crept up on by the killer, but she's trying to get back her boyfriend. It's like, I'm lonely. Like, can you come back? I'm lonely and alone. Like, if you come back, I'll let you feel my boobs. And I couldn't help but just start laughing when she said that, because I was like, that is incredibly 80s right there. It was like so like, nicely said, like, I'll let you fondle my breasts. But at the same time, it just is so, yep, there's that 80s still kind of like sex driven comedy.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, the radio part of that too makes me laugh too, because yeah, she's listening to the broadcast, like, we just want to let you know the killer on the loose. Last time seen on this highway, blah blah blah, about 10 miles from blah blah blah, and she turns on the headlights, and there happens to be a sign that literally just says like, that route that she's on, and that place is 10 miles away from them. She's just like, oh shit. You're like, oh yeah. And then he brings the axe, and he wants to axe her a couple questions, and apparently axes her up pretty good and chops her up, and and then it just goes boom right into modern, what would be modern times, in the 80s and stuff like that. Goes right into it, and it's just basically, kind of, your cliche 80s movie at the time, two college kids, well, nerd kind of dudes, just trying to get cool, and trying to be cool, and trying to get the girls, and go to the frat parties, and the frat guys are always going to be, doing this, and making the pledges do weird things and do weird stuff, and just like in everything else, you got to do that. In the 80s, what? Why not in the 80s? Why not make the pledges bring a dead body, cadaver to to drop it off at another frat house's stairs as a joke or whatever like that. So they break into this scientific place, which is really not very well security, because they can leave. I mean, the main character, other than Rusty's guy, JC, he's handicapped. He's got like the arm, the arm little things, so so that he can move around and stuff. So he's not very nimble. He's not very agile and quick. So he can basically get down to what he needs to get down to. But yeah, they go into it. The guy forgets every number but the last code, and he just happens to hit the button. It is the last code. They open it up. They see this guy in there, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're just gonna start hitting a bunch of buttons and stuff like that and let it go." And it's like, oh yeah, it's like always in his movies. You're always like, man, when you do stupid shit's gonna happen, and
Oh yeah.
and stupid shit happens, and it brings back the dead guy.
Yep. They free basically the boyfriend from 25 years ago. And that's the funny thing is, it doesn't really go into detail as of how they managed to cryogenically freeze this guy. I mean, all you really know from 25 years ago is that she got asked a couple questions in the back seat of the front seat of the car, and that's really where it left. Because while boyfriend man was as usually stupidly investigating the crater kind of thing, is when little slug jumps up into his mouth. And so all you can assume is that back then he was infected, probably doing a lot of crazy things, and they found a way to just subdue him and save him for testing. But yep, typical play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And they open up the canister, and he's lying on the ground kind of thawing out, because it was weird, because they didn't really know what to do when they kind of freed his body. So they go running out past the stupid scientist kid who couldn't remember the code to get in there in the first place. And then he's in there going the fuck's going on? Why is the cadaver lying on the ground? And little slug fellow jumps from one mouth to another, and now we've got a new infected, and as all of that stuff is playing off in the scenes, is where kind of the romance is trying to be a thing as well, because you've got Chris trying to get Cynthia, JC's kind of playing wingman, Cynthia's kind of got a boyfriend, kind of got that frat partner, but she's not, I guess, as into it, but kind of, I guess, maybe feels well, it's I'm in college, and it's the 80s, I should have a boyfriend. That was the thing that always was kind of weird to me about this particular relationship thing, is it's not so much that the quiet nerd, or the quiet guy wants the girl. That's in almost every movie that's ever existed. It's that it's kind of weird where you usually have a concrete relationship where the girl's either back out on the market or realizes that her mate's an asshole and she's just over him and leaves him, you know, or it develops into realizing that her mate is an asshole, or he gets killed or something, kind of depending on the movie. But this was just kind of a weird little thing where it seemed like she was in a relationship, but only because she kind of felt she needed to be attached to somebody, but was never really committed. I don't know, Devil. It was always kind of bizarre, I felt, when it came to that situation. It seemed more like less about, hey, this quiet guy just wants that popular girl. It was like he had to jump through all these hoops, but I don't really know if there were a lot of hoops to jump through, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of interesting, you know. And then you finally get the introduction to the police officer, detective Tom Atkins, and you find out a little bit more of his backstory throughout the movie and stuff like that, because he keeps on having these like sort of like nightmares and stuff like that. And you find out that he just when he got there on the scene in the 50s and saw his ex-girlfriend getting asked a few questions, and he didn't particularly like that, so he took Mr. Crazy Man, loony bin guy, and put a shotgun to him, and buried him underneath the ground that just happens to now be the head matrons of the sorority, where the head matron D girl, who's woman who's running making sure the girls aren't doing anything that they're not supposed to do, kind of her house is in there, which is basically where a lot of this madness starts coming up. And it's just like it's cool. It's this crazy like slug attack, bug attack, I mean, eventually at one time it comes after, JC, and, he's, typically in the, he's on the shitter trying to do his piece. And, he's right before he sees these bugs, though, while he's in the shitter, we were talking about things that rock and rule, and apparently Striper rules.
Striper rules.
Which was a cool thing. And we kind of found out like why. I was like, that was just such a random, to not that Striper wasn't big in the 80s. I mean, they definitely were, but there were other bigger, huger bands in the 80s that you would think that like somebody would have put like, depending on the year, Motley Crue, or Def Leppard, or
Judas Priest.
There's like so many other bands, but it was kind of weird because it's like, really, Striper? Like not that I don't, not like Striper, but they're a Christian metal band, so it's not like one that people pop up most of the time. But I found out that Michael Sweet, who is the main guy from Striper, was actually dating and or married to the girl who did the production of this.
Yeah, and it's that same kind of thing where it's like, yeah, dude, I mean, we love Striper, dude. We've seen them a ton, including recently, but it's that kind of thing. It's like they've always been completely on Front Street when it comes to their faith and stuff like that. And again, we're by no means telling people not to believe what they want to believe, but like, Christian metal and horror don't exactly go together. It's a little bit oil and vinegar, or whatever, oil and water, as opposed to like, peanut butter and jelly. They don't quite match. I mean, they will in specific senses when you're dealing with, vampires, the Exorcist, different types of demonic stuff. That's where it fits, yeah. But just having kind of like an alien infestation / slaughter movie, don't really think about a Christian metal band right off the top. I think that would have been a really cheeky thing to add into something like, like maybe that more recent Exorcist movie that they did. I would have been like, okay, that was slick, so, but I mean, it's cool, man. But like, it's an interesting build up, because like now you start getting in. That's also when you start discovering things where, JC randomly is like, well, will fire protect me? So he lights a matchbook on fire and a slug runs into it, and that thing just fucking explodes into like just shrieking pain meltage. And it's like, okay, I need to remember this. And it's the beginning of what leads to a really crazy kind of battle scene of guns, shotguns, exploding brains of slugs, both literally and figuratively, as in mutants and bullets, and flamethrowers of all things, like government issue, like World War Germany flamethrowers.
It's crazy too. In that bathroom scene, you kind of felt bad for him too, because like you said, he's a
Pants down.
Yeah, he's a handicapped guy. All of a sudden, he fights that one, and then all of a sudden, all these other slugs start coming towards him. You're like, yeah, this dude can't even run. He can't even get away or whatever like that. But the crazy thing about this too is like his character is the only one that they don't really explain. Most of these other people, as soon as these slugs get into them, they pretty much turn right into like brain dead zombies right away. Where
Yeah.
his character kind of gradually do it, because you find that he left a note, left this little thing telling Chris about like, that, he's been infected and that he loves them, but he said that he walked on his own as the first time he's ever walked and stuff like that. So he had that still that ability to like still be partly human and stuff like that. So it was always kind of weird, like where everybody else like who basically gets these slugs, it's like 2 seconds later they're mind-dulling zombies and stuff like that. But I always found that kind of cool, but I always found that kind of weird too. But yeah, I mean, it's just, and then pandemonium is just going everywhere. There's 9 billion slugs all over, man. They get inside the frat house, and which leads into like one of my favorite lines. Tom Atkins is at the sorority house, and he's like, "Hey, good news and bad news. Good news is your dates are here. Bad news is they're all dead."
No, for sure, Devil. And the thing is, too, like, here's my kind of thing on that. And again, I could be totally wrong. It's just kind of the way that I sort of looked at it, because it does seem a little bit like a continuity error with JC. But maybe it could be this. Maybe I'm thinking a little too hard into it. Is like, he's also the only guy who kind of didn't get infected the normal way that you're kind of used to. Like, the slug ran up his pant leg. So, like, did his main slug infector go up the nether region? So maybe that was a reason why it took a second, as opposed to if it's like straight up mouth to mouth, it's right up kind of in the brain stem area pretty quick. So I don't know. That was always something I thought maybe could possibly be a thing, was the fact that, you never really see any slugs go into his mouth, despite the fact that he's crawling, and you do see one coming at him. But the only one you're really familiar with is the one that kind of makes him fall off the toilet to begin with, which is the one that runs up his pant leg. So I don't know. That was always something I found as maybe a potential for delay. But that also, at the same time, I accept that could also really just be a stretch on my part. But no, I mean, Tom Atkins with these movies, dude, there's always at least one great line. There's always good lines in his movies, but there's always like that one great memorable line when it comes to that. And it's what also just starts leading to like the finale of just Bloodfest type thing. And I mean, I love the scene when the the axe wielding hitchhiker busts up through the floor to get another piece of people still carrying that axe. And Tom's like, "Oh, hell no. I killed you. I buried you myself." And not only does he just get riddled with bullets as Tom's collecting himself, but then Tom just epically shotgun blows off that dude's head.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. They're chasing after him, and like I said, I thought that was kind of funny too. He's around a bunch of cops. He's like, "I already killed you, man, once," and then I'm like, "Dude, you gotta keep that shit on the low, man." Like, you know what I mean? They're like, "What the hell?" But I thought that was kind of interesting. I like the fact that they kind of showed you, because that's where he buried that, the crazy killer in that town, in that building. And so that's, you hear like the maitre d's like watching TV, and the dog is like, "What the hell?" And you keep hearing like something banging underneath the floor, and then he comes out, and you're like, okay, so apparently these slugs can also infect dead people
Right.
and make them come back alive too. So it's not only are they making zombies, they're also making, zombies. They're making people, they're taking dead things and making it, which, like I said, and goes into that you know, big huge finale, fight, like you said, the old school like German flamethrower. They're
Right.
like, they're shooting him in the head, making their heads explode. That's when all the slugs come out, and then you burn them up, and then, in Tom Atkins, fashion, he's like, you know what? He's like, I'm just gonna blow everybody up with myself. I'm gonna take one for the team and just blow everybody up. And you think that he's blown up, and then the end of the movie he kind of comes out kind of charred, and you're like, okay, they won. And then he falls down and his head splits, and the slug goes into the graveyard, and you're like, oh great, well this is gonna suck, because like, with that previous, that he can go into, slugs can reanimate the dead. And I'm like, yeah. So it's like, you with these kind of movies, you were expecting, with that ending, like, oh crazy shit's gonna happen, and then they never made a sequel to this movie. So it was just really,
Despite the
really,
fact that
really
here came
odd.
the testicle aliens,
Yeah,
right? You saw them in the first 5 minutes, and then you see them again in the last 30 seconds, because we didn't really speak on this, but when the slug, the initial slug, or who knows, there might have been more than one slugs in that capsule that got ejected. The problem was one of the testes, I'm just going to call them, it straight up said, like, dude, the experiment cannot leave the ship.
yeah,
Part of them going to Earth is to retrieve the slugs, the experiment, I guess. So I guess they had been dealing with some type of the ability to resurrect in some way, shape, or form. So they had to go get their shit back. But yeah, I mean, there might not be a potentially clearer example of what could have been a sequel that seems to never be. I mean, dude, next year it'll be 40 years for that movie.
yeah,
And I've never even heard, like, even a casual conversation on a Night of the Creeps 2. I'm down. I like Night of the Creeps, bro. So like,
yeah,
I'm down for that one. I don't expect a sequel to it to be all that, but I wouldn't hate it. I'm
yeah,
curious.
yeah.
I'm curious enough, bro.
Especially with those kind of movies like this, like, like I said, you have these kind of movies that are these weird out space movies with aliens and crazy shit like that. I mean, even like, that leave it into like a possibility of a sequel, and then maybe not, or maybe it will. I mean, like I said, this one leads right into it. It's kind of like Critters, like the very beginning of Critters, where it's like, oh, they're gonna leave the possibility for it. So it's like, it was kind of up in the opening. I mean, it probably has to do with this movie wasn't a box office, blast. It was this movie became a cult following. People didn't really like Night of the Creeps until like years later, when they finally realized like the absurdity of it, and the purpose of making it stupid and absurd. And they started getting the humor of it, and they're like, oh yeah, now we do. But by that time, its time is already gone. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, like I said, yeah, I mean, out of all the 80s movies, and the other thing too about it too, it's kind of surprisingly that we haven't, I mean, had even a remake of this movie. You know what I mean?
Right.
Where people love the remake 80s movies, and some ones that shouldn't get remade, and some that should. I'm not saying that this movie is on that list of movies that needed to get remade, but
Yeah.
hey man, if the right person did it, I would be down with a remake or a sequel of this movie, just because it'd just be fun. You know what I mean? It'd just be cool. And it's just a over the top stupid movie that needs to get more people watching it.
It truly seems criminal to me that this is not a Trauma or Full Moon movie. And of course, we know that, like, Lloyd and Michael are the dominant writers, kind of creators of all the Trauma movies. Same, with Charles and stuff like that, being the dominant kind of like brain director writer with a lot of the full moon stuff, but it really seems criminal that this movie isn't attached to one of those two. For me, probably more likely full moon, I think, especially too with the naked butt testicle aliens, because they give me a bit of that Ginger Dead Man like feel. But because also full moon is a little bit more, not only do they have such a huge catalog of their movies created for them by them, they're also, they kind of double more also as a distributor entity, where movies can be done by other directors or written by different people, and they're kind of like distributed or financed by Full Moon. So My Night of the Creeps just feels so Full Moon to me, but it really does feel almost a little sad, almost a little insulting that it's definitely not attached to either Troma or Full Moon, because man, it just fits.
Yeah, I mean, there's a possibility that, like I said, sometimes with some of those movies that came out, maybe, because the fact that it was by Fred Decker, it was kind of it was sort of, I wouldn't go as far as saying it was a big Hollywood movie, but it was attached to people who were, Tom in this movie, like I said, you got, like, and all those guys that are in this movie and stuff like that, or, were kind of like not really huge names, but they were up and coming names. So there was a possibility that, like, maybe they were, even though they Fred was making a movie that was, off the wall, kind of poking fun of the horror genre and the sci-fi genre in general. I think he figured that they were probably making it more serious than like the Troma movies and things like that, because Troma movies were made, at the dexterity, even the movies that weren't Troma movies to begin with, but got distributed by Troma, like Cannibal the Musical and things like that, where
Exactly.
it fits the Troma thing. Where, like you said, in this one, it definitely has a little bit of that Troma feel to it, but Troma's definitely more of your over the top sexual and over the top more over the top violence and absurdity, where Night of the Creeps definitely feels like it's almost a marriage between the Troma movies. That's why I said, like, Roger Corman, those old school, like,
True.
sci-fi movies and stuff like that he used to do. So it's like a little bit of like all those three movies together, like a Roger Corman, Troma, and Full Moon movie is the Night of the Creeps. So yeah, it's just, it's, I wish it, like I said, I would have liked to have seen a sequel. I mean, maybe down the line somebody might do a remake of it, but like I said, I mean, I'm usually against remakes. I mean, we normally are. I mean, if the right person does it, then I'm cool with it. I mean, it doesn't necessarily need to be, anybody super massive, but as long as they could be even a new up and coming director, as long as they truly appreciated the original and kind of still kind of keep that aspect to it. Yeah, I'm completely down for it.
Could you picture Damien Leone, dude, doing a Night of the Creeps? I kind of could,
I
because
mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's a little bit too. I think I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing it, but then again, I mean, you're kind of taking away from the Night of the Creeps, where it's like that perfect blend of horror and comedy, where he mixes that, but it's more of this like extreme violence stuff, where the violence in this movie was extreme, but it was done in a stupid and absurd way. It
yeah,
wasn't meant
well,
to. It wasn't meant to be realistic. It was
yeah,
just like unrealistic, where the heads are exploding and stuff like that. Where Damien would make it too realistic, where people were getting their heads cut off and
that's
bugs
fair.
coming out. It would look a little too realistically gory versus this over the top kind of cheesy gory.
Yeah, I mean, and it's funny too, because like while I feel that Rob Zombie also could make a very quality Night of the Creeps remake, because he loves that old school, and he does love camp. We saw that with the Munsters. So like, but at the same time, Rob really loves that psychedelic feel, and Night of the Creeps isn't really a psychedelic movie like that. But I mean, I guess we'll have to wait and see, because that's just kind of the way that it is. It'd be, like I said, I'm down for a remake when I'm usually not. I'm down for a sequel. I don't personally foresee it happening. I could see it possibly down the line. Maybe when you and I are talking in our next, century, when there's more ideas being explored and stuff like that. So like when you and I are, having these conversations, in the 2100s, who knows, maybe we'll get something there that allows maybe that more of that 80s feel to it. I just don't currently see it because I don't know. I just don't think there's a current director. Like I said, I think Charles, in my opinion, is the closest. But Charles, they're not, even Full Moon's not remake oriented, They do sequels and stuff, of course, but they're sequels to their own franchises. I just recently got a brand new Subspecies movie, so I couldn't be more stoked about that. But they do sequels and whatnot for their pre-existing franchises and stuff. So yeah, Devil, my friend, we're just gonna have to wait and see, man. Maybe we get it, maybe we don't. We'll just have to wait and see. Hopefully I don't get staked. Hopefully nobody freezes over hell, and we'll just have to wait and see in the future. But let's jump into the obituaries, my friend. How do you see Night at the Creeps? I think both of us are actually going to score it pretty high based on the way it's designed, the execution, and the fun factor. But how do you look at it overall in general?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this movie here it's fun. As far as as far as it goes, there's only a few movies that are night of that I feel they're in the same ballpark of this, and Night of the Creeps is definitely one of them. It's just something about night of movies that I tend to really really love, man. It's just like, especially when they're just done like this, kind of like over the top campy, just go balls to the walls, you know what I mean? They're Night of the Creeps, Night of the Comet, Night of the Demons, you know what I mean? I just love
Yeah,
those movies where they do like that. And like I said, I mean, it's just a fun story. It's over the top stupid to begin with. It's like this aliens or losing slugs and stuff like that that comes out to then, and it's bringing people, turning them into zombie killers, and making more slugs, and it's just, it's not meant to be taken seriously. Like I said, this movie in no way or shape or form was like, Oscar nominated, and it's not gonna win any huge, golden awards and none like kind of stuff like that. But in the realms of people who are into the horror genre like we are and love like the 80s camps, this is definitely an award-winning movie for us. We see it
yeah,
as like, there's there's a lot of movies that like are the same way that weren't done as good as they could have been, where this movie just delivered in everything that we wanted in a movie. It's got a little bit of everything in this movie, and like I said, in that sense, it's the reason why why I give it such a high score. And like, like I said, is the plot the best thing in the world? No, it's, yeah, you know what I mean. It's your typical 80s, college rom-com kind of movie set into, you know, alien slugs that turn people into zombies. So it's like, yeah, we've seen it before, but have we seen it before with Tom Atkins just fucking things up every time you see him on screen? I love him in this movie. Reminds me of like what is that, Kirk Douglas or whatever his name was from Falling Down, you know what I mean? Where
yeah,
he was just like, you know what, I'm tired of this shit. I don't even care anymore. When he goes to like crime scenes, he's just like, He's like, why the hell are you doing this? And what the hell are you doing that? He's like, he doesn't give a shit anymore. He's drinking. He's just shooting people. And, even the scene where, he has to get into, he gets the German flamethrower, as we called. He had to get it from the police, like, yeah. He's like, do you have the paperwork for it? He's like, nah, as he's loading up his shotgun. I don't really need that paperwork.
But even that, dude, like, how the fuck is that even just handy? Like, how is it even though you have to have the paperwork to like turn into the police, like a permit? How is it even accessible to like the local sheriff's department? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, you should have been breaking into like a military armory.
Yeah. I mean, it's the absurdity of it. Like, why not? Why wouldn't that police department have,
Of course
a freaking flamethrower from hell in this, and why wouldn't they? So, like I said, adding all those factors, adding all that thing, yeah, I give Night of the Creeps an 8.5.
Right on, man. No, I can be with you on that one, man, for sure. Like, it's an 8 for me overall, but 8.5, dude, I'm super down to roll with. We can just bypass the bullshit, and the back and forth, because we both just love this movie, dude, and I have no reason not to give it a little edge because I love the movie. I mean, there's so much absurdity to, like I said, having shiny, hiney, testicle-headed aliens open the movie. It's one thing to find out in the movie how these slugs are a thing. Where the fuck did these things come from to infest the world? Oh, this weird rogue alien decided, fuck it, I'm gonna try to escape with the experiment while he's being hunted down by like the quote unquote stormtroopers of like the spacecraft. No, dude, you don't have to wait for that. They open the movie with these characters, and then just all the little things, the weird romance, the axing into a second weird romance, into the figuring it out, into the bloodshed. The body count is fantastic. Like, at one point, you just see bodies lying on the ground around Tom, just like fucking blood splatter all over the walls, and you're just kind of like, holy shit. Like, you kind of can't help but watch the screen, but feel like you yourself are just looking around at these bodies, just going like, what the hell? So, nah, Devil, I'm right there with you, man. No need to make things harder than they need to be, and no need to like debate on things that are fun. As the old saying goes, never turn down a good thing. I'm down for you, brother. 8.5. That is the way that the Vampire and the Devil are putting Night of the Creeps for the letter N in our alphabets of horror on the obituaries. That is the way it shall be, and that is the way it shall stand. Thank you, as always, to our beloved partners and sponsors. We appreciate you guys. Thank you for your support. We've always got your backs as well. Horns up. Fangs out.
Devil, my friend. Oh, yeah. I think if there's anybody who would know hot things, it's you.
Oh, yeah.
So I think it's only right that you let our beloved Fangs know what they can order now, courtesy of Coney Island.
Oh, yeah, man. We're in the kitchen. It gets hot in the kitchen. And what else better for your finger foods, for your tacos, for your victims that you may be eating? Maybe some sauce. And you should get it from the sauce boss, Coney Island sauce. Oh, yeah. Get some of that good stuff. Oh, yeah. You like to sprinkle it on anything. You could sprinkle it on your fingers. Sprinkle it on your toes. Sprinkle it on your hose. Anything you want to sprinkle goes.
Absolutely. We have partnered with Coney Island Saucery. Aaron is fantastic. We really appreciate all the love he's given to the show, and we're very, very pleased and honored to be a part of him. So he's got 4 sauces out of various heat levels to enjoy on all your various foods, but also for anybody who is already following his socials, our socials, or is about to be, newly announced partnership with Slayer.
Slayer, oh yeah,
Coney
it's
Island
gonna be
sauce.
burning fire.
Oh yeah, Coney Island Saucery does have a Slayer brand hot sauce coming out very, very soon. And so make sure that you check that out for all your various levels of spice. This is Vampire and the Devil, Coney Island Saucery. Horns up, fangs out. Devil, my friend, I think we should have a little quick conversation about everybody's respectful celestial abodes, where it be my little coffin where I lay my head at night, or at times that you feel that you just want to go back down to make sure that hell's not getting out of whack while you are away. Let's talk about Vampire and Devil's newest partnership in Twisted Vines, our dear friends, Chris and Sarah and Cadaver.
Oh yeah, you like scary stuff, you like horror decor, come and check out Twisted Vines. They make all the kind of cool shit, all for your house, all kinds of scary shit. They love it. You like to bring back the horror, you want to scare your neighbors, you want to conjure up a friend to talk to, you want to conjure up somebody bad, you want to do some bad stuff to them, you go to Twisted Vines and get some of their merch.
Absolutely, for sure. Everything is completely handmade by them. So if you need a little friend, maybe a round set abode, maybe you want to conduct a little evil towards a friend that was a friend, maybe no longer a friend. They have voodoo dolls they can do for you to allow for such activities. But you know how much we love our Ouija boards, my friend, and they make all of those by hand. They took care of your beloved vampire with a nice Nosferatu board, but the devil, he happens to be a Munsters fan. And not only do they do boards as traditional rectangles, but they can put a little bit of coffin flair in them.
Oh yeah, look at that coffin shape Munster board. Yeah, you wanna conjure up Mr. Herman? You wanna ask him how Pet Cemetery was? You can do it on this board. Oh yeah.
Absolutely, my friend. So again, thank you so much to Twisted Vines for partnering with the Vampire and Devil podcast, and make sure that you Fangs and Infernos are checking them out on their Facebook page, on their Instagram pages, and making sure that you are checking them out as they move around the country, showing their craft off at all of the various horror cons and oddities expos that they love to do. So absolutely, my friend, of course, man, horns up, fangs out for our friends at Twisted Vines.
Oh yeah. What's up? It's the Devil here, and we're about to talk about movies with the devil in the title again. This time we're going to talk about The Devil's Bath. Oh yeah, not that kind of bath, although the devil loves taking a bath. Oh yeah, that hot water, getting you naked, maybe making you cut your wrists. Anyway, it's about the 17th and 18th century Europe phenomenon where women were being depressed from births, all kind of depression and craziness of living life and trying to be the woman of the family. Anyway, it's about these women who decide, because of religious parts of their life, they cannot commit suicide, which is the ultimate sin, because they'll come and see me, and that's why. So they have to devise a new plan. Maybe kill a child, then confess, and then confess their sins and get atoned and then get killed for it. And it's pretty crazy, this phenomenon that was happening. You gotta check it out. It's based on real events that happened back in the 18th century. Ooh, that was a good time. Oh yeah, they used to fear me. They fear the devil. Now they're like, oh, devil wants to go to the movies. Oh, devil wants to hang out with me and see a movie. Oh, devil wants to go to the mall. No, that devil used to scare people, and it's time to scare people again. So go check out Devil's Bath, or I'll join your bath like Freddy Krueger and come up and get you sometime. Anyway, check out Devil's Bath.
Ghouls and goblins, spooks and creeps, our beloved Fangs and Infernos, and all of our goblins and ghoulies in between. We've got some fun conversations to talk about because, as you know, Devil, my friend, you and I aren't exactly steeped in reality. We are mythological creatures. We're either here or we're not. People believe us, in us, or they don't. That's on them, as far as I'm concerned. But there's a nice, horrific history of mythological creatures throughout the history of our beloved various bloodsheds. That includes some very grim, ever so grim fairy tales. What do you say, my friend? I think it's time for a discussion.
No, yeah, it's time to talk about those fairy tales they tell in the dark, kind of like, Tales from the Dark Side, or maybe a little bit of the Are You Afraid of the Dark, but mixed in with a little bit of the Grimm brothers. We're going to talk about those, beloved movies that, you know, Disney has taken advantage of and made them sweet and innocent, but the root of the stories have always been dark and evil. And we like dark and evil here on the Vampire and Devil podcast.
We do, man. Absolutely. So why don't we talk a little bit about that, tale involving a sweet young thing, and her pint-sized companions with that angry older lady, and talk a little bit about those two lovable souls and a gingerbread house.
Oh,
I think we should talk a little bit about Snow White, A Tale of Terror, and Gretel and Hansel. What do you say, my friend?
Oh, yeah. It's time. Like I said, it's time to take the kiddies to bed, because this isn't the Walt Disney version. This is the bloody grim versions of the movies.
That it is, my friend. Let's flip the script a little bit. Let's jump into Snow White, A Tale of Terror, my friend. Let's start off with your pick for this one, which I think is an awesome movie. I've been familiar with it forever. Saw it a really long time ago and hadn't really thought of the movie all that much. And, stars Sigourney Weaver, which is super duper awesome, which I absolutely loved her portrayal of two characters in this movie. But it was not only super cool to watch this movie, it was fun. And while I found it very quickly, which was cool, it was fun to kind of search out for like a physical copy of the movie to add to my collection, because like I knew I'd be able to see it, whether that was you and I get together or just find a platform or something. But I mean, when you had mentioned the movie, I instantaneously remember the classic DVD cover from seeing it over the years and just never bothering really to pull the trigger on it, of that, kind of, yellowy black, Sigourney's witch face mixed with like, the witch and the apple kind of look. But then the version I actually found was just kind of this cool all black cover with like a dimmed like red apple with Sigourney's face kind of in the middle of it, which was actually a pretty cool like version to find. I mean, it's not like a special version or anything. It's like an alt cover, which I actually thought was pretty cool. But when you pitched the movie, I was like, oh, dude, that's a great idea, man. I really, really like that idea for that. So I was super into it because I immediately just got that visual of that movie cover that I was already so familiar with. But a very, very cool spin-off of this movie, a very, very unique take.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, what's not to like about it? Like you said, it's got Sigourney Weaver in it, at that time, Ripley and all these great movies that she's done. It's got our boy Sam Elliott in it. We did, from, Event Horizon and all those great movies, Jurassic Park and all the great stuff that he's done. So I'm like, to me, like I said, everybody's always familiar with Snow White, like I said, with all the Disney movies and stuff like that. This, and don't get me wrong, I liked all the versions of Snow White, whether it be the cartoons versions that you see, or even like, the new ones that came out, the Huntsman and all that kind of stuff. They were pretty good. This has always been my favorite Snow White movie, just because it's just so dark and evil, and it's like, it's basically like, how like we're talking about these, these fairy tale horror, horror stories, with the Grimm brothers and stuff like that, where this was just, just so perfect for, a discussion, because it's just so evil in this movie. And it, and like I said, it's basically the same story. You've seen it 9 billion times. It's Snow White, wicked stepmother, doesn't really like her very much. She's too pretty, blah, blah, blah. It's got your basic storyline, but it's got a lot of the Undertale stuff of it too that you don't always see in the Disney versions of this movie, which I love. It starts off with like her, her as a little, girl, and you see all this stuff like that, and with her mother, her mother dying, and it came down to the decision where, her mother was having a bad pregnancy, and they had to choose, the king had to choose, between his wife or the child, and he decided to, to save the child. So, it starts off, very kind of grim just with that. She's already lost her mother, and then, then the father's bringing in this, this new person that, she doesn't really know that very well, and the Snow White's, mother, the wicked stepmother, is kind of like that. She's really not that bad of a person in the beginning when you see her. You
Oh,
know what I
really?
mean? She seems like she's like, okay, yeah, that, she's got this, and she's doing that, and she brings her the puppy and stuff like that and tries to get her. But Snow White, just being that, like, typical, little kid, or even when she turned into a teenager, that angst against, you're not my real mother kind of thing, kind of drives her to almost become this wicked monster to a point, almost to a point.
Yeah, because it's kind of interesting because, like, just like you said, Devil, the movie starts off with basically a carriage accident where, the king, where Frederick has to decide between exactly saving his wife and losing the child, possibly saving the child, losing his wife, or possibly just straight up losing them both if he doesn't act on anything. And then, yeah, it fast forwards to, the Frederick and his daughter. And she's kind of, she's kind of prissy, she's the son of a king, so there's a certain amount of, like, I guess, arrogance or being spoiled or whatever, kind of however you want to look at it, I guess. I I didn't really think that it came across like super heavy, like that kind of spoiled. Like, how dare you look at me? How dare you talk to me? Like, where's my butler? I want my latte. You know what I mean? Like, wasn't really anything like that. It was just kind of still that typical, apple of her father's eye. They're gonna have a tight relationship. Because they both suffered this trauma. But then, of course, there's always that situation of, well, a man's got needs kind of a thing. It actually reminds me a little bit of the well documented real life tale of, like, Lizzie Borden, where Lizzie's mother passes away, her father eventually remarries, Lizzie's not a fan of her stepmother, and ultimately kind of gets knocked down the totem pole, as back in those days, the pecking order of inheritances typically are spouse first, family, kids second. And of course, you can adjust your will any way you see fit. But just traditionally, back in the 1600s, for the Lizzie reference, that was typically the pecking order. So, Lizzie, of course, is now dealing with the fact that this woman is now above her when it comes to any good things that would come from whenever her father was to pass away. But anyway, it is that same kind of thing. And Sigourney's character, now getting back to the movie, is that same kind of style where it's like she doesn't really come off that terrible. She really comes off more as the, look, I know I'm the third wheel. I know I'm the new ingredient in the soup. Like, but can't we all just get along, kind of a thing? It really wasn't until the introduction of the magic mirror that the ulterior motives start to kind of make their way through who Sigourney's character is in real life, Claudia. I loved the cabinet with, like, the interlocked hands, for the door. I thought that with the doorknob, I thought that was super duper cool. But yeah, it's kind of one of those things where it does come across a little bit more as just the extended grieving of a child not wanting this new person around, but then ultimately realizing that there was a reason for her to feel the way she felt about her.
Yeah, and like, that's the thing about this movie too, is like, even with the mirror, you know what I mean. In the beginning, I don't really, like I said, at least in my opinion, the way I kind of felt with it, with the way Sigourney was kind of going into it, and even though you see that the mirror is evil, it's got an evil presence to it, but I felt like Sigourney's character didn't really, the stepmother didn't really know what the power of this mirror was. I don't really feel like she, because, like, like, in the movie when the little girl, when Snow White's still little, her nana looks into the mirror, and it kind of like, takes her life and, kills her, kind of gives her a heart attack and basically, kills her. And like I said, and in the beginning, obviously the story of the mirror is that, this is an evil mirror. But like Sigourney's character, when she's doing it throughout most of the movie, there's really no interaction with, other than her just seeing kind of her own reflection.
Yeah.
There's no entity that you get until Sigourney Weaver's character is going to have a baby. Her and the king finally after all these years finally conceived. He's trying to conceive a son, because in these times, you know what I mean, you could have a daughter, but they really aren't really supposed to give, they got to have a son. The son is your actual heir regardless, something like that. So
For turning over a kingdom.
yeah, turning over the kingdom and all this stuff like that. So he's hoping that this, and Sigourney has a miscarriage. It's, which goes into more of this darker side of this story, where there's just so much, like you said, with the mom dying in the beginning, you got this miscarriage and stuff like that, and then she's like freaking out about having this miscarriage, and then that's when the mirror kind of talks to her. And like, at least in my opinion, when I first saw this movie, or even just watching it again, that Sigourney looked kind of confused when she was hearing the voices. She was like, who is that? Where is that coming from? Like, she's never once ever heard the mirror talk to her. So I think it wasn't until that point is when Sigourney Weaver's character kind of started becoming evil. Like, this is what you need to do. Your kid's really alive. Don't let them burn your kid. Which was just crazy. That in a sense was just nuts. You know what I mean? She basically tells her brother that's in this movie, that, don't let them burn them. And, they're taking it out and they put them in the fire. And all of a sudden, he takes them out of the fire real quick. And she's keeping this like basically dead fetus, in this movie. It's just, like I said, it's just those little things in this movie. It's so creepy and just like so well written and so well shot. That's not like over the top, like graphic, like, like Eli Roth crazy horror kind of stuff. But it's just the creepiness of like, oh, like you're gonna keep, like, who's this? Oh no, the baby's still alive. And there's basically comes where, you can make this son come alive. What you have to do is you got to take the innocent, kill an innocent, and the purest person in the world, which was basically Snow White. And that's what brings ultimately why, this evil stepmother and Sigourney's character is basically going, okay, now I need to do this is what I need to do now. And basically just kind of sends her brother off to kill her. And it's a Snow White movie, so she's not gonna die. Not at least not to the right in the beginning. So I just found that funny where he's trying to go after her, and she kind of gets away, and he ends up like taking like a boar's heart and gives it to her, and then she's just having her way with this heart and eating it and drinking the blood and just thinking that it's the Snow White the whole entire time. I just love that because it's like like I said, when you start seeing that part, it's when this is the turn of when the evil wicked witch, evil stepmother Sigourney's character is basically like that turn for where she's now become the Snow White version of what we were used to with her always. Because in every other version, Wicked Stepmother has always been this evil person. Even in the very beginning, she's talking to the mirror, and the mirror's telling her all this stuff like that. Where this movie, you don't. Like I said, to me, I don't really think that she's a bad person in this movie. She's in a situation where she's the new person. She's taken this affection from her, away from the husband, and maybe a little bit of jealousy of that kind of to begin with, where he's paying more attention to his daughter than to her, stuff like that. But I don't really feel like she was this horrible character until that moment when she lost her child, and the mirror kind of like convinces her this is what she needs to do.
Yeah, because ultimately that, I think, is kind of the, I feel like those are kind of the moves made in this movie. So you referenced the original Snow White, the Disney cartoon that everybody's of course going to be mostly familiar with, where the stepmother's always been this wretched character. But the interesting thing about that is she's always been this wretched character. She's always had the mirror. So she's always talking in the mirror that way. Where in this movie, she's always had the mirror, yes, but it seems like this version of Snow White gives you more build-up, gives you more backstory, and allows you to watch kind of the creation of characters. And you know me, Devil, I'm a sucker for good backstory. I love learning about how characters became the way they are. That's one of the reasons why, I tend to be kind of a minority in this, but I happen to be a big fan of the Rob Zombie Halloween movies. And that has more to do with the fact that, while of course, when it comes to Halloween, John Carpenter's original Halloween is still and forever will be the gold standard, but it goes from, the killing of his sister to him being seen incarcerated, but then jumps forward to adulthood. I like the fact that Rob's vision was to show him growing up in the asylum and showing that real relationship developing with Loomis. And that was something I always really appreciated about Rob's take on Halloween. So anyway, when it comes to Snow White, I like the fact that it almost seemed like Claudia was more of a pawn in the mirrors game. The mirrors playing chess while everybody else is playing checkers, as the saying goes. And I like that type of developmental story for this, which I found to be very, very cool. As opposed to just being like, look, man, you just know that she's just a cunt from day one. No, she's really not, because they could have spun it in more of a classic way where Claudia could have come in as this is my opportunity to marry a king, fuck that little bitch. But here it's more like, well, however it happened, opposites attract. Maybe he spilled his beer on her at the at a restaurant, and that's how their initial conversation started. However it was that they really met is anybody's guess, but it's more of that classic development of a relationship, but her still being that kind of third wheel, as I mentioned before. But it really seems that for this one that, you're right, that the mirror is designing the way it needs to be, where, look, things happen. Children are lost due to unforeseen circumstances and different reasons. And now this is where the mirror's opportunity to really corrupt Claudia has its opportunity to kind of shine. Where, yeah, she's the mirror's probably always been kind of influencing certain things, but more on that, just like little devil on the shoulder kind of thing, as opposed to like a split personality where something very deep rooted in your subconscious or conscious is telling you that people are laughing behind your backs. Don't let them do this. This is how they want you to be, but you need to stand up for yourself and be this way. So yeah, I do feel that loss of child, which makes this, while it's a grim fairy tale and it's a dark gothic version of Snow White regardless, that's how it was always designed and built, is still, for the late 90s, is still some serious topics that they were not afraid to use in the telling of this movie, which I think is really, really cool. But it does seem that was the mirror's, light bulb, bing, of being like, now I've really got something to fuck with her mind, and I can get in there and really warp and twist and get her to start doing the things that I want her to do to ultimately make us, quite powerful and whatnot, which is also what leads to, Claudia's transformation into the witch with the poison apple, which I thought was very, very cool, and again, that's no different than the original tale, but I just love the way it was done in this one, with Sigourney donning that makeup as well. They didn't bring in another actor or actress to play that character. That's Sigourney under a whole lot different version of makeup, doing something different from her original character, which I thought was ultimately, very cool. And then, the way that she, while still being this kind of grotesque hag, still was able to silver tongue, sweet talk Snow White, Lily, enough into getting her to take a bite of the apple.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, that was probably like, like I said, one of the three parts of this movie that are like my favorite parts of the movie. Where, yeah, the mirror, like I said, the number one is the mirror kind of making its presence known after a tragedy. Which, I mean, one can think that maybe the mirror is the reason why she had the miscarriage, because we know that mirror was evil to begin with, because like I said, we saw it as Lily was, Snow White was a little child, and it killed her grandma,
Right.
killed her Nana. So we know the mirror was already bad to begin with. We've kind of seen that Sigourney doesn't really seem that bad. So maybe it was this mirror kind of is the reason why, okay, if this is how I can sway, her into becoming this dark witch, this dark side, this dark, evil, wicked stepmother, by forcing a hand. So boom, I'm gonna do this miscarriage and make them lose the baby, and that's what drives it crazy. So that was like my first thing I loved. I love like you said, I love the makeup and the take of her as this witch character. It's so awesome. I just love the like you always see it in the cartoons, and even like the live action version that they had still had nothing on this. I loved the grotesqueness of her and the playfulness where she's like, talking about this and like, oh, you like a guy, like, and she's like, you can see that there's a reason, because like in all the other Snow Whites, I never quite understood why Snow White was biting this apple.
Yeah.
This woman was obviously not a very good person. You could tell, not the disguise of a witch, but you can just she just didn't something just didn't sit right. Or the way she was she just looked like an old peasant woman that was
Yeah.
just woods woman that was just like, oh yeah, yeah, I'm just gonna clean my clothes. And she's like, oh, you like boys, oh yeah, get yourself some nookie, that kind of playing with her and stuff like that, and kind of getting her confidence and being able to talk to her and stuff like that. And then she's like, obviously she hadn't ate for a while. So she's just like, ooh, I got this apple. And like, ooh, I just happen to have another one, which, you know, makes more sense of why she would have bit this apple versus like, hey, little girl, do you want to eat this apple? Like all of a sudden,
Yeah, but even that's always annoyed me a little bit, Devil, about how she would like present these kind of average looking apples, but then still pull out the one glorious looking one.
yeah.
And
I
Snow
mean,
White
yeah, I mean,
feels
there
like
was
she needs to
definitely.
take a bite of that one. I'm like, you don't find it a little suspicious that in a bushel of average whatever looking apples, there's one glorious one? That's a very suspect apple to eat.
But I mean, but it's kind of, I mean, it's still, I mean, it's just a tale that's always done. You know what I mean? When you're
Totally.
hungry and you haven't ate, you're gonna eat. I mean, look at our girl in Labyrinth when she takes the peach from Hogwarts. Hoggle. You know what I mean?
You're
Like,
right.
come on, you shouldn't have ate that. Like, all of a sudden, he just happens to randomly have a peach. All of a sudden, he hasn't had any food throughout this whole entire movie. That all of a sudden has this peach, and she's gonna eat it and go to La La Land and go see David Bowie and dance around for a little bit. But
You're
like
not
I
wrong.
said,
You're definitely not wrong.
like I get it, but I always liked that. But like this version at least made more sense of why she would have taken the apple
Yeah.
versus all the other ones, because all the other ones was like stranger danger, here, eat this apple.
Yeah, like
and
the
then
original cartoon, like creepy witch, like coming through your window and
yeah,
you're
yeah,
down
yeah,
to
which is
see it.
made
We're like,
yeah, it
dude,
made no sense. And then my third favorite part of this movie was, the way that they did the story of the Snow White was always, the dwarves, the seven dwarves. Where in this one, they kept the same motif. These guys are woodsmen, they're miners, they're going in and stuff like that. But I like the fact that they didn't make them, there was one short guy, there was
right.
one, there was one, dwarf or a midget or whatever you want to call him at the time, small person, little person. But I liked how everybody else was basically just your They were just normal people. They were just guys who were just living in the woods and just happened to be miners and happened to do all this stuff like that. I love the way that they kind of just played those off. And then you had the one guy that was kind of bad, and you had the one guy that was kind of good. And eventually she didn't really like him, and then she kind of falls in love with him, which made more sense of like this like forbidden the kind of love, because she's kind of in love with the prince that in the beginning of the story that she's kind of been fond with, stuff like that. But now she's kind of not 100% sure, because she kind of really likes this guy, which makes a little more sense than these old guys, and she's a young girl. They're a little bit closer to her age, versus like the dwarfs in the Snow White movie were all like old ass men. They were probably like in their 60s or 70s still.
Except for Dopey, who was like,
yeah, except for Dopey. Yeah.
who's like the underdeveloped, the mentally underdeveloped.
Yeah. So I always liked that way of it. And it was like a lot of the cool stuff. When she's trying to get to him and making the trees move, and then the when they're in the mine in the cave, making the cave collapse and stuff like that. I always liked that way. It's like those are like like I said, those are all parts of the original Snow White story. But I always just like really, really dug the way that they did this version of it. It just made more sense. And then, like you said, she eats the apple. She goes into the glass, into the glass tomb, because, they think that she's dead and all that stuff like that, But like I said, it's just, I don't know. There's just something about just the way that they kind of took what was a story that everybody's already knows. Everybody knows the Snow White story and stuff like that, and kind of kept that same motif where you're not abandoning so much stuff away from it, but you're adding this extra stuff and these other things that you don't get to see in the other ones. Like you said, like the backstory of this, you get to see all this kind of stuff. You get the more interaction with her and the miners and stuff like that in this movie, and you figure out, you get more time with the father in this movie. You get a little bit more time with Sigourney's character before she turns, and then ultimately when she turns.
Yeah. No, totally, Devil. Because the other thing too is ultimately the part that we're getting in now is it's actually my biggest kind of problem that I had with the movie was this particular scene I'm about to get into. But also ultimately we're also reaching the end and the climax of this movie, which is also very, very interesting as well, simply because the whole biting of the apple, ultimate death into resurrection happened very late in the movie. There was not a lot of movie left once this, these scenes actually started happening. So I'm definitely with you on the use of the quote unquote dwarves for the movie. I like the take where it's like, they're not so much little people, but they're just kind of like smaller woodsmen. Like, they're not big burly dudes. It's not like they did Snow White and the Seven Lumberjacks where it's these giant, brawny paper towel looking guys. But, they're like average guys, but maybe slightly on the slightly shorter side, but not anything like, a little person or a dwarf per se. But I love the fact that they use that from the cartoon where, yeah, they're miners, they're woodsmen, they're still everyday handymen. So it sticks with the story. But I love the fact that they're a little bit more average Joe-ish, which I liked. But anyway, getting into to Snow White's subsequent death and then resurrection is actually the part of the movie that kind of annoyed the fuck out of me the most. While I still liked it, and I liked the way it was shot, I thought it was beautifully done in certain ways. The glass coffin I thought was very cool, and I really enjoyed it. I hated the speed in which the scene was done, mixed with kind of the feeling of important parts left out. One of which being the kiss, if you're doing like a Snow White movie. The idea of her taking this bite, basically dying, being buried or in the process of being buried until the discoverance by the prince, where he breaks open the coffin, pulls her out, but then ultimately just kind of yells at her to breathe, and she does. And she coughs up the little bit of apple, because like in the movie, ultimately it wasn't fully swallowed, but it's the only part that felt a little underdeveloped to me. I felt a little robbed in that sequence when I was like, wait, so she ate enough of this apple or swallowed enough of its juices to put her into sleep or hibernation per se on her way to, I guess, what ultimately would be death. Because if the dwarves, for lack of a better term, were to follow through and completely bury her, I mean, dude, it's a wrap. She's not breathing anymore. She's buried alive. So I don't know, man. I didn't love the whole breathe thing, yelling at her, to just have her just kind of do just that, almost kind of wake up, cough up the apple, and then ultimately go back into life, as now she kind of seeks her revenge of her now very possessed stepmother that tried to kill her. And I don't know, I didn't love the writing of that particular scene. It made sense. I'm not going to say that it didn't feel out of place. But when you do have certain, when you're doing fairy tales or long-standing stories that have certain key points or things that are of a certain value, I feel you need to find a way to get those in there. And that also will go for Gretel and Hansel when we go into that, because there's a part left out, a theme or something left out that I felt is kind of vital and important to the story. So anyway, the lack of a kiss, the fact that all he really did was tell her to breathe and she like heard him and did it, is, I don't know. I didn't love it. I really didn't. It just seemed, it seemed incorrect. And I kind of felt like it was a little incorrect on there as it led up to the final showdown between, Snow White and Claudia.
Yeah, which is weird, because I kind of feel the opposite of that. I felt like, I mean, granted, yes, I get the kind of like rushed version of it, like how you felt with it. But to me, like, I've always, when it comes to the story, this version is always more of a somewhat realistic version, where I never understood why, like you said with the witch in the beginning, you wouldn't have trusted the cartoon witch. The witch in this one made sense to kind of somewhat trust.
Sure.
Where, like, in this movie, where it's like, she's got to get kissed from her true love to kind of like break the. That's always been these, Sleeping Beauties and all this kind of. It's always been like that love. That's what's gonna bring her alive. It wouldn't make any sense if he would have just go, oh no, she's alive, break the coffin, go in the coffin, give her a kiss, and all of a sudden she's back out. So it made, I mean, where like him yelling at her to breathe kind of still somewhat doesn't make any sense. I think it's like because she wasn't completely dead, and with her, with the prince, she kind of always thought she loved him, but I think she just loved, the dwarf, the guy who was supposed to be a dwarf more, the minor guy. And I think it's just the magic of, like, whenever true love, like, Princess Bride kind of style, where it was literally like him just going like, no, you need to live. And it's more of his voice and him kind of pushing this is what broke that spell from her kind of more. So it made more sense in my opinion, I think that's how it would have been. Because like I said, to me, if he would have just opened the door and go, oh, I'm going to give her a kiss because she needs to live, and that's it, and then she all of a sudden coughs up this thing, it'd be like, what? Where at least this, it's like kind of like, with I just use it as an example for a second, but Princess Bride, when they go to to Miracle Mike's or Miracle Max's, like,
Miracle Max.
and they give him the thing, he's like, oh, you think he's dead? Oh, he's only mostly dead. Where like she's mostly dead, and like basically him being able to use his voice and kind of emote this love that he loves for her so much that's like every, especially in fairy tales, love is the ultimate cure for everything.
Yeah.
So that's what kind of was him kind of like, no, you need to live, no, you need to live, no, you need to live, and that's what kind of got her ultimately to breathe a little bit and then cough up. So like to me, I think it made more sense than what your traditional Snow White kiss wake up kind of made. So I think in this it kind of made more sense that way. But I mean, yeah, I think it did feel a little rushed a little bit, and it was kind of like cheesy. But the one thing I loved about that scene, at least in somewhat that, like you were saying, that coffin, that sarcophagus, but that glass coffin was cool as shit. And I loved how the front part that was in her face was the mirror and the glass from the miners, the dwarf's house. So I loved that, how they used that part of it. But yeah, that's how I kind of felt with that scene. I felt like it made more sense than the traditional kiss wake up to do this, because this was kind of like the version that they were telling was a little bit different, where I think if he would have just kissed her and she would have coughed that open, I would have been like, so people just cough up a shit and come back alive when you kiss her or whatever.
Right. No, and you, everything you said, it definitely makes sense. I think ultimately it was the rushing. And
Yeah.
even while the kiss, it would have worked for me as a nod to the original. I can't argue against your point either. But because even the breathe to then so quickly have her cough it up seems almost equally as bizarre as giving her a kiss and then just having her cough it up. Again, something like just the speed. If they had given this scene in movie time, 15 or 20 more seconds where he says the breathe thing or tries to talk to her, and maybe does something where like he's holding her hand and maybe puts his head down like this, and they allow for a little bit of that like dead time to then bring it back, and then it comes out or something. I feel like something like that would have made the scene much more just realistic and proper.
Yeah, it's a possibility that they may have done that too, and maybe they just had to cut some stuff for time, and they were just like, yeah,
True.
okay, maybe we'll do this. I mean, it's a possibility. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I think it was a little bit too rushed for boom, she's dead. Boom, he goes breathe like 3 times or whatever it was. Very, very little bit
It
of
was
time,
the
and all of a sudden she
CPR.
comes. It didn't seem as dramatic as it should have been, which I
Right.
definitely agree with that. I definitely do agree with it.
Yeah, and that's really ultimately my thing. I was like, no, stop. Why the fuck did you treat it almost kind of like CPR and stuff like that? But again, it's not ultimately. It doesn't ultimately make it a bad scene. It's just two slightly separate minds that are like, just little tweaks of how we both see the scene and stuff. But ultimately, as we get towards the end of the movie, we get towards the final showdown of Lily and Claudia, Snow White and her stepmother, which is that traditional struggle leading towards overpowering with, Claudia putting, the knife up to Snow White's face, giving her a nice cut across her cheek. But ultimately, Snow White taking advantage of the mirror and realizing that mirror is the catalyst for everything that's gone wrong, and impales that mirror with that knife, with the dagger, and it reflection style reacts to Claudia's real life chest as if she was to take a knife stab to her chest, and then she pulls the knife out of the mirror herself, Claudia does, which ultimately bleeds and has her real life self aging, basically till death, which I thought was a very, very interesting way to kind of do it. And I will say I did like the fact that, we've had multiple conversations about movies that, either make fun of no epic explosion or no epic death, versus movies that do have an epic explosion or epic death, some that we think works great, others that we think were kind of campy and stupid. I liked the way this kind of worked out. I liked the kind of slow aging. It kind of gave me that picture of Dorian Gray feel to it, ultimately to, to falling down in a fiery grave.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, and to me, it made sense. I mean, a lot of people be like, "Oh, I don't get it completely," but to me, it's like once once the mirror kind of got her under her wing and was able to do this, and she made her this and made her pretty and made her feel like this, and obviously made her and turned into the witch and gave her this power. When she killed, it was basically kind of like selling yourself to myself, selling your soul to the devil kind of feeling. And that's what it was when when the knife went through the mirror. It was ultimately like, well, yeah, that's the way that you got to defeat it, because she's sort of, her entity of who she is that mirror now. So like I said, and it ultimately is like exactly how the story of the Snow White is. You know what I mean? You find out that the mirror is is the the culprit, and the person that you need to take out. So it's like,
Yeah.
take out the mirror. So yeah, like I said, I love that. I love that, like, that kind of like, this mirror was basically kind of like keeping her young, and that's kind of like, again, she's always had this mirror. She's always kind of been, like I said, we don't think that she was evil, but maybe there was always little intentions that this mirror was doing. And that's maybe, even though she didn't see the mirror and speak to the mirror, but maybe that's how, she kept beautiful throughout all the times and stuff like that. So, I mean, that's what it was. This mirror was kind of keeping her more youthful and kind of beautiful, so that she could get the king and could get him. So it's like, yeah, you kill the mirror, you slay the beast. So yeah,
Mm.
like I said, I liked it. I thought it was a cool way to end the film. I thought it was a, like you said, it was a cool, this like cool scene where she's just like, takes it out and bleeding, and she's just like, yeah, like you said, that Dorian Gray kind of feel to it, where it was like, yeah, I mean, I thought it was a cool way to end it. You know what I mean? I thought it very, very fairy tale-ish,
Yeah.
very, very exactly on point to, Snow White and or fairy tales, and Wicked Witch of the West, Wizard of Oz kind of tale, and stuff like that, of this like, killing the beast and slaying it. So yeah, I was down for that ending. I thought it was cool.
Yeah, man, I definitely liked it as well, my friend, for sure. So, obituaries, my good devil. Let's talk a little bit about how you saw Snow White: A Tale of Terror.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, to me, I'm gonna score this one high. I mean, not super overly high. I mean, granted, yes, this movie was made in the 90s. You know what I mean? It could have, I love it. It's got his sense of camping into it a little bit. It's got that. But I mean, like I said, I love it. It's a high, not really high budget, but high kind of like brow. You mean, you got like like I said, you had Sigourney Weaver and Sam Elliott, who were like two huge actors and actresses at this time. So I thought it was kind of cool that they had both of them in this film, and being able to do this movie. And like I said, to me, this has always been my favorite version of any of the Snow White movies, just because I like it, because it's more of how these tales are supposed to be. I mean, he's kind of like, dark tales. He's kind of like, don't do this, don't do that kind of stuff, to it. So I've always liked it. And like I said, I always thought these like just the little kind of little things that they were into, where they changed little things, or little things that they, you saw and stuff like that, with it, with the brother helping her to hit, to try to kill Snow White, and him being like this, evil kind of character, and eventually like kind of getting, you know, screwed over by his own sister, because she found out that, oh yeah, you lied to me. Well, yeah, that's not good. You don't lie to me, kind of feel to it. So it's like, like I said, I've always been a high guard. And like I said, there's not, I mean, now it's kind of cliche and cooler now that we got all these, like, people remaking and making into that horror genre that doesn't get too much love sometimes.
Yeah.
So like I said, to me, I always felt this was, just like, epitome. If you've never seen fairy tale horror movies, this is a good one to start off with, because it's like kind of like, early in these kind of movies for that kind of stuff. So I always gave it high. So it's 7.5 for me.
No, absolutely, bro. I can definitely see you on that one. The movie's a 7 for me personally, but we don't really need to get into the debate over before because I'm super cool with 7.5 when it does come to this movie ultimately. I just when it comes to when it comes to like the design of the movie, the style of it, the while I didn't hate certain scenes, it makes sense in retrospect, especially after a discovery, but I still a discussion but I still, feel the way I feel about certain scenes and about the way that they're executed versus the way that they're also edited. Because again, I can't completely punish the scenes that really might have been actually shot the way I think they should have been shot. Not necessarily with a kiss versus a not a kiss, but a certain amount of delays, using a certain amount of time. But that doesn't change the fact that that doesn't mean that the studio wasn't like, nah, we need 45 seconds to vanish somewhere. So like I definitely get it when it comes to that. I like the take, I like the design, I like again the storytelling, and when it comes to fairy tales, ultimately that's a really really, big thing when it comes to these type of movies is you can do a fairy tale movie, but if you're half-assing the actual storytelling of a fairy tale, you're just dead where you stand. It's just not going to translate well. It's not going to age well. And this movie, I do think actually ages pretty well for a movie that was actually put out on Showtime, which I think is very cool. It's not even actually a theater production, which I think is super duper cool. But again, great cast. Yeah, Sam Neill is fantastic. Sigourney Weaver just doing what Sigourney Weaver does. And I ultimately just think it's a really good overall movie. But yes, while personally for me it is a 7, I definitely think a 7.5 is very, very applicable for this movie because it is very, very well executed and does stand on its own merit and has no need for any type of secondary bullshit, whether it be sequels or continuations or anything like that. So 7.5, we are down for that, Fangs and Infernos, for Snow White, A Tale of Terror. And as we jump into its counterpart, we're definitely going to break into a movie that subsequently is much more polished. You can tell that it had a bigger budget behind it, had somebody who was an actress that ultimately I always enjoyed anyway, had a lot of respect for, was very excited to meet, but ultimately when you and I met her, made me respect her that much more for just the kind of person that she was. But also the movie itself is just a very, very unique tale, and that's the tale of Hansel and Gretel and the gingerbread house, but in this case, Gretel and Hansel from 2020. So with this movie, I really love this movie. I love the way it's shot. I love the way it looks visually. The color scheme, which I'm going to get into at a little bit later on in certain scenes. But I almost am curious how the fuck Robert Eggers did not get his hands on this, because this movie feels very The Witch. It feels very, even to a certain degree, Nosferatu. Stylistically, I love the period piece, demonic possession, changing of skin tones. Again, we'll verify for the Fangs and Infernos exactly what we mean by that. But I really love the design of this movie and the way it comes out with, Hansel and Gretel and their relationship to this older woman, this grandmother, this witch, and the trials and tribulations that they had to go through for survival.
Yeah. And like I said, I mean, yeah, it does have that, that director, like, that Robert, the Edgar kind of feel to it. But it, ultimately, I'm pretty sure, if I'm wrong, we'll cut this out. But I'm pretty sure it was directed by one of our alumni that did Longlegs. Didn't Osgood Perkins make this?
He sure did.
Didn't Anthony Perkins? Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yep.
Anthony Perkins' son
Oh,
made
yeah.
this, which we know we've talked about. Yeah, this is before. This was an older film that he had done. But
Yeah.
a lot of people who would know him as doing that Longlegs that we talked about on our episode about 2024 movies that we thought were really cool. So I always thought that was kind of cool too, but I didn't even realize that. Going back and watching this, watching again, I'm like, oh man, dude, Osgood did this one? That's kind of cool. I'm like, we've talked about him before and stuff like that and the pedigree that he has. But yeah, it definitely does have that kind of feel of like that. I mean, I love just as far as like the simplicity of this movie, I really, really, really dug it. I really dug the, storyline of it where, everybody know, like, again, with the Snow White, everybody knows the Hansel and Gretel story. It's, kids going around in woods, leaving trails of bread so they can figure out how to get back to their house, and they get lost and they go into this candy, house, and the witch, and she wants to kill it. Where, the movie is very Hansel and Gretel. I love how this one is titled Gretel and Hansel for a reason.
Yes.
It's more of a story of Gretel than it is Hansel. Hansel's in it. He's definitely considered a character. I would put him as probably the third most important character in this movie. Obviously,
Yep.
Gretel and the witch are the two main characters in this movie, and then Hansel is obviously just because you couldn't really do this movie without Hansel. But then again, you probably could have made this movie without Hansel, but then it would have been weird to have a Hansel and Gretel story and not have Hansel in the movie. So I get why he's in it. But yeah, I love that how this movie was more about her. It's more shot from her perspective throughout this movie. So I really, really like that to begin with, where you find out that she's a little different than most people, and eventually you find out why, and later on in the movie. But she's because it's kind of a little bit weird kind of thing. I love that the actress they got is from the new It movie. She was the one that played Beverly. So
Yeah.
I love that they used the main character that an actress that people would know. So the love of that. Like I said, I love the fact that the witch is the Borg queen,
Yep.
from Star Trek. Like I said, we met her and stuff like that. So I just thought, like I said, I thought the casting was well done, and I love the fact that it's just like the simplicity. It's another one of those ones where, like, when we did Antichrist, it's just not very many actors and or characters in this movie. I mean, theoretically, you have you have the mom, but she's almost nonchalant throughout this whole entire movie. So she's just like barely in this movie. You have the woodsman that they kind of meet when they first go out, who's in this movie. But other than that, it's literally just Hansel, Gretel, and the witch, which is, I just love the simplicity of it. And I love, like I said, I love she's telling, this Gretel, Hansel's like, tell me the story of the witch and stuff like that, and she's telling the story, which ultimately kind of ties back into, what we go when we get into when we find the house and we find the witch.
Yep. And that's ultimately where the color schemes I had mentioned that I really love. Yeah. So anyway, Alice Krieg, what a sweet lady. Like Devil, you and I met her at a con. Didn't have a line, at least not until 30 minutes later of us talking to her when it had sort of appeared. But she was so nice. Loved, signed a photo for me of the witch character. Told us about upcoming movies that she did, but couldn't have been more genuine and more sweet, and one of those people that love talking to fans or just love talking to people about cool things, because she was in no rush to dismiss us from the table. Even when some people started coming to the table, it really wasn't until you and I realized that we didn't want to be those people holding up other fans' experiences that we dismissed ourselves. But really, really awesome. But I love this witch character. But anyway, when it ultimately gets to those scenes, because this is stemming from, Hansel and Gretel's mom sending them out to try to find work to provide for the family. They get a job. Gretel basically kind of says, like, fuck that, because she's not comfortable with that first opportunity. They get scolded by their mom for not providing for the family, and then basically bounce. They're just like, fine, whatever. We'll just go live in the woods. And so they spend some time in the woods. And then, ultimately meet Alice's character, the witch. And when it comes to the witch character, but those scenes in particular, bro, oh my God, dude, I love the color scheme in which this movie was shot, because for at least probably a solid, at least a minimum 3/4 of this movie, it's shot in this amazing black and gold style of filmmaking. Whatever lighting they used or editing that they used, I really loved, because it dominantly was only two color schemes in this entire movie, which was black and gold and black and white. And the black and white, I mean that more sparingly, because anytime they were kind of outside and away from the witch, it was still very dim. You know, it was in full color, but like it was still minimal, like light browns, minimal greens. It was like very dim. You're out in the woods, kind of like, you know, stormy weather-ish type lighting. But when they were with all the times that they were in the house working with the witch, all of that, I really was enthralled in watching those scenes with the color scheme to it. And I haven't felt that way about the way visually about the color schemes of a movie in quite a while after revisiting this movie. And I was like, man, I really love this black and gold combination that they're doing. I found it fascinating. It really was so unique to me. And you are learning different things about the witch's character, where, you know, because Gretel has a certain amount of like kind of witchcrafty supernatural powers about her that the witch seems to want to kind of, you know, nurture to a certain degree, whether it's ultimately to take over or to potentially build a companionship where maybe those two could possibly ultimately just become a pact and, you know, for lack of a better term, just go on ruling the world. And you see Alice's, you know, witchy character with these crazy black fingers, you know, where all of her skin tone is of that of, again, using it kind of loosely, a normal skin tone. But these, you know, fingers up to her like knuckles are just completely pointy and black, which is really, really interesting, and it's really, really unique. And I had mentioned it in our previous conversation with Snow White about things that felt needed to be a thing that I felt a little jaded about not getting. There was a small part of me, because I also love the tale of Hansel and Gretel. So when you and I were talking fairy tales, I kind of went this movie pretty quickly because I just loved the opportunity or the possibility of getting to talk about Hansel and Gretel. But the gingerbread house was an incredibly dominant factor of that story. But again, this movie doesn't warrant a gingerbread house. It kind of plummets the potential realistic seriousness of what they were trying to do. I would have loved for them to maybe find a way to make a nod to it, though. Like if there was the possibility for a scene of where maybe the witch offers Gretel and Hansel a plate of like gingerbread cookies. You know what I mean? I feel like something like that could have been a cute, very interesting Easter egg to kind of slide into. But again, ultimately, with what Alice's character is doing and trying to get accomplished, living in a cookie house is definitely more detrimental to her ultimate badassery had they decided to go that way. But I wouldn't have hated them to find a way to tip their hat to the actual Grimm fairy tale with that, by finding a way to do a gingerbread something in there. But anyway, ultimately, I really do love the witch scenes and the way they're done. I think it's so beautifully shot and so intriguing. And the fact that it has this very night and day feel where inside the house is actually very dark and grim and evil, but it's actually got more of that daylight feel to it with all the bright golds, as opposed to being outside of the house to a certain degree safer, but a much more darker storm cloud-esque kind of look to the way the lighting goes. I loved it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and you know, going from the beginning part, yeah, I love the fact that, you were talking about, like, the mom's like, you need to go out and get a job, and she goes out and tries to get a job, but then you're kind of wondering, it kind of felt like she was gonna be a prostitute,
Mhm.
sort of like mid housewife, like going, like it felt really like really weird, like it was very like pedophilia kind of. I mean, at that time, it probably wouldn't be considered, being a pedophile because it was a different
Right.
time period. But like, it was just very odd. Like, oh, you're too good to not want to sell your body, then then get out of my house because we don't have the food. But yeah, I mean, as far as the gingerbread thing, it's kind of like in the same sense of the Snow White, where they wanted to be more serious.
Right.
And like I said, the house being a gingerbread house, it's like, okay, this is kind of kooky and stupid. I don't get it. But I mean, it still had that element of the house because of her having the food in the house all the time, and then
Yeah.
basically enticing them with the food. So it still had that element. It just wasn't, the house wasn't made of it. I'm like, again, maybe to the scene where we talked about Snow White, with the witch, where in the cartoon version you were like, you wouldn't have never trusted that witch. In this one, where it's like, yeah, if you would have seen a candy house, it would have been like, okay, this is pretty crazy, and probably would have gone back to a time in the movie which they probably wouldn't believe it was real, when they were super super hungry, which is probably one of my favorite parts of the movie, and they find mushrooms. And they're like, well,
Yeah.
there's a good mushrooms or bad mushrooms. Well, they look like they might be good mushrooms. And oh yeah, they were the good mushrooms. They were all tripping balls for a little while. Which, I mean,
Oh,
I think if they were going to nod into the gingerbread house, I think, you throw that Easter egg for a second with that, maybe that scene would have been interesting, because they would have been like, oh shit, there's a house made of freaking candy and food. And then
yeah.
you see them trying to eat it for a second, then all of a sudden they kind of get out of their buzz and they're like eating, like, the freaking brick house or whatever it was instead. So, but then again, I think then it would have taken out of some of the seriousness of the film, and the way the film is meant to be a very dark and kind of
Yeah.
linear.
Oh, and that's one of the reasons why I was like something like one of the food options, or maybe an offering of maybe something like an offering of gingerbread
Yeah,
might have just been kind of a slick little, be like, ooh, that's good. Because it's like, okay, exactly, in the form of realism and having a movie of this design taken seriously, living in a candy house is not going to be a thing.
yeah,
But I just think if you wanted to do that, that would have been a unique kind of slick little thing to slide in. So that's all I mean for that, where I was like, I'm not gonna pretend for a second that I'm gonna lose points on this movie because I didn't get a gingerbread house. Oh hell no.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
I love Easter eggs as much as the next person, especially dealing with something like fairy tales and previous established histories. I like the ideas of what's a way that we can nod to something but not fully do it, because we know if we do it, it'll be stupid for this movie. That's all I mean for that. I just
yeah,
I just think that would have been kind of slick, should if they had the opportunity to do it, and maybe they thought about it and just didn't feel it would be correct, which is
yeah.
totally understandable because it's their movie, not mine. I just think it would have been kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, but the funny thing about this too is, like, a point that you made in Snow White when we were talking about it. It sort of kind of brings it into this movie too as well, where you were talking about with the witch showing the apple, and she's got her apples that she was eating that were kind of grimy, and then she's like, hey, try this apple that you said is like a perfectly perfect apple. In the very beginning when they have the food, I get it. But periodically through this movie, when they keep getting this big, huge, like extravagant, like dinners, and where do you think that food's coming from? Have you never see any cows, any deer, any meat, anything like this? But yet all this food is just magically appearing. You
Right.
would think. I mean, like I said, I get that in the very beginning. They've been walking around the woods, and they're starving. they're gonna eat fucking. They're not gonna question whether or not this food is poisoned or not, or whether this food is this or that. They're gonna freaking eat it regardless. If it's poison, they die. Oh well, then they're out of their misery.
I died full.
Yeah, they're not hungry anymore. So I get that, but yeah, like throughout this movie, I mean, eventually you find out how the food was getting made and what the food is. But yeah, in the beginning, like, the couple days they've been there for like a couple days now. They've been there for like a week now, or however long they've been there. No one ever questions, like, where is this food coming from? There's never once a mention, not even maybe from Hansel and Gretel to the witch, even with just Hansel and Gretel themselves. There's never really like, okay, we've been helping this lady in the house for a while, and doing these chores, and I'm gonna go chop some wood, and she showed me this scary ass shed that's got all these tools with fucking saws and craziness and shit like that. But where are all this? I've never seen her cook.
Yeah.
We never see any, like, where is all this meat coming from? Like, she has like endless supply, and like, I'm not even, like I said, it's not even like she made enough food for like the three of them. It was enough food on that plate, that table every day. That's for like a kingdom. That's like what you see a spread at, like, your 20 plus, 30 plus person at Thanksgiving kind of a spread. You know what I mean? It wasn't like it was just a couple pieces of meat here, a couple pieces of meat there. I mean, it was enough. There was so much food on there that they would only be able to eat like 1% of the food every day, but yet every day was a completely new spread. So it wasn't like it was they were eating leftovers or anything like that. It was always a new spread, which I always thought was kind of funny in this movie. Which, I mean, like I said, we get it as like we know as we're watching the movie because we know the tale and we know obviously she's a witch and she's probably it's probably not legitimately what they're eating, even though they think they're eating turkey legs and stuff like that. They're more than likely probably really not eating turkey legs. But like there's never really that question between the two of them, like, where did all this food come from?
Right. Which ultimately leads towards the climax of this movie where the witch really starts witching out on them. And, Gretel is almost to a certain degree like crucified down in like the basement. Like she's, tied up against the wall. She's got like spikes through like her wrists to kind of hold her in place while Hansel is kind of being targeted as like, the first real like sacrifice kind of the two of them. But then ultimately, because Hansel also starts like noticing things as well, because there's pentagrams carved into trees. There's so much just witchcrafty type things that are becoming noticeable, where they're like before, just like you said, shelter, a good spread, fresh water. You don't ask a lot of questions when you're, it's the old saying goes, beggars can't be choosers. You're just stoked to have these things. But then, as the time goes by, is when you start to like notice things, and you start to see things. And ultimately that's what starts to happen as, the witch's plan gets put into motion, and she, is able to, for the time being, do away with Gretel to get Hansel kind of in her clutches. Gretel's ultimately able to escape and is able to use her, psychological powers, her mind powers, the inner witch that she has with the supernatural abilities to do away with Alice's witch character. And I loved the ultimate like fight, like, or in the ultimate execution in a certain ways. I mean, the however it is. Anyway, the mental power of uplifting a pitchfork to impale her through her neck into the wall while she's rescuing her brother, but then also kind of ultimately have that typical kind of you're at my mercy and yes, I'm a badass moment by forcing that final like thrust as you just hear that crunch through her neck for, the witch's like ultimate, demise. But then it also leads to the inevitable question that we're slightly left with is doing the way away with this terrible person, is it a gift or is it a curse? Because while the execution happens and you think, okay, everything's fine, it's gone back to normal. I loved the blue flame style execution as well as a nod to the Grimm fairy tale with the pushing her into the oven. So I really did love that I did get that. I got some kind of oven reference to the demise of the witch. So I really appreciated that. But ultimately, the movie ends on a very unique cliffhanger or downer to a certain degree, where Gretel's like, no, everything's cool. She's dead. We don't have to worry about her anymore. Why don't you go home to mom? I'll be there soon. As she's staring at her hands, as the same black fingers that were on the witch, are coming onto her, like her fingers are turning black in that same witch style, in the same way that the witch was. And it ultimately does kind of lead to a curiosity question of, well, can Gretel now no longer go home? Is she now doomed to this life? And while ultimately she kind of did it for good, is she going to morph into a potentially terrible person? Or is it a little bit of simply a Highlander style where, when you kill another immortal, you take over their powers and their past and their memories? Did she ultimately increase her powers by doing this, but still is cursed with, if nothing more, what let's just call the mark of the witch?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I feel like with that, I think it was more of like, once you've killed, it kind of does leave you that mark. But she even says, like, am I, am I bad or am I good? Well, I guess time will tell. And it's one of those ones where, like, she's gonna try to be a good witch, but ultimately, who knows whether or not she's gonna have to go down the path. And that was a cool thing about, like you said, like, backtracking a little bit before the ending, where the witch, witch's character is teaching her that more stuff, and she's using
Yeah.
the salve to put on her hand, where she can move the broom around with her hand, kind of teaching her the tricks of the trade and stuff like that a little bit. And like I said, I love, like, as we're sticklers for backstories, you find out about that, the tale that she was talking about, where this girl, had a child, and the child was sort of like a prodigy and had like these extra powers and was able to tell people their fortunes and stuff like that. But a lot of people didn't, or their future, and people didn't want to know the future, because a lot of times most futures is what you're going to tell people about their deaths.
Yeah.
And people didn't like that, and it kind of sent her away, and she just decided to go fuck it and goes evil, and she makes her own father kind of like take a freaking hot poker in his mouth and kill her father. And the mother doesn't know what to do and sends her away to this woods and stuff like that to kind of keep her away. And then eventually you find out that that character is ultimately the character that the witch is. And I love how, where we see her as this old witch, but it's like she's not really an old person. That was just like a cover. You see her in the basement when she's doing all the rest. She's a younger person. So it's kind of like, is she the younger one or is she the older one? You're not really sure, but she can intertwine between being both young and being old. And that's
Yeah.
what I liked about that scene. I think with, like you said, while she was down and they had her and they were trying to, obviously kill Hansel for, for power and the food and being able to get the stuff that she needs to get to do this, her being able to, her teaching. Basically, it's kind of like one of those things where you teach somebody how to do something and eventually it comes back to bite you in the ass. And that's
Yeah.
pretty much what it was, where she was like, oh shit, yeah, she showed me how to do this. And she's like, boom. And then maybe, when she found out she had that power, she was a little bit because of her maybe being younger and stuff like that, she had a little bit more strength in her, and she was able to take out the witch. So yeah, I thought that was just a cool when she takes that pitchfork and then she gets her and she's kind of stuck there, and then she's just like gives her that one little quick little, and she's just like takes her real freaking, takes her, breaks her neck and all, it kills her and takes her head and shit like that. I just thought that was really cool. But I was like, yeah, to me, the way that at least that I felt in the ending was just like, okay, yeah, she did a bad thing. She's kind of, she's embraced her witch, her power of this witch, which is why she had the black fingers.
Yeah.
Necessarily doesn't mean that she's gonna. I don't think the black fingers per se mean that she's gonna be evil. There's
Yeah.
always been that kind of lore that witches have. There's been other movies where witches have the black fingers and stuff like that. Whether always, most times in movies, witches are always bad anyway. Not necessarily meaning they need to be bad, but they've always portrayed as being bad and evil. But a lot of times it's just like circumstantial. Like, well, yeah, of course you're bad. You've like basically outed them, abandoned them, pushed them out in the woods, try to kill them, try to burn them all the time. And that's not even considered the religious aspect of it. Like,
Yeah.
I understand, like, then if you throw that aspect into it where, those religious nuts are going to come after you, because, you're evil or this kind of stuff like that. Well, I mean, well, yeah, I'm gonna go after you and try to kill you because you're trying to kill me all the time. I'm just trying to live my life in the woods, being naked and free, dancing around a fire. Maybe I might do some little hooky stuff. But it really, like I said, a lot of times it really depends on how they feel it. Where this one has had that evil side of it where, yeah, she ultimately realized that, like, to keep her powers and do that, she lured kids into their death, and that's how she became powerful, and that's how she was able to create this darkness and create her magic and her evil, was by enticing, her mother didn't want her, so she's just gonna kill all kids, you know what I mean, kind of like, fuck it, no one's allowed to have these kids and stuff like that, which I thought was really cool. But yeah, to me, at least far as I felt in the ending, was like, yeah, I think that she was gonna. I mean, they never really. I mean, as of late now, they haven't made a sequel to it. But I always kind of felt like in the storyline, if they wanted to keep going, it's at least in that beginning, where they're like, okay, maybe she's gonna go off and do good stuff, where she's gonna, help people and stuff like that. But then, like I said, maybe she's good for a while. She's good, she's doing this, she's doing that, she's building this, she's building that. Eventually people are gonna find out that she's a witch, and ultimately you're gonna have those people who don't want her around to begin with, and or religious nuts that probably ultimately are gonna turn her into a bad witch, which is basically what Alex Creed's character is basically saying, is like, yeah, you can do whatever you want to do, but ultimately, this is what you need to do. You need to lure kids to their death. You need to do this because the world's a piece of shit. And no matter how good you try to do, like you said, she wasn't, like, when she's a little girl and she's telling these fortunes, the future, she wasn't malicious.
No.
She told them what they wanted. They just didn't want to hear the shit that she wanted to say. This was gonna happen, So it's like, ultimately, like, getting pushed and shunned and this, and the dad not liking her because of this stuff, and it's just like, yeah, she was ultimately kind of pushed and shunned and forced to become this evil character. So, like, like I said, she would have had that, nurse, loving nursing, loving mother. Maybe she wouldn't have been an evil witch. So it's like, like, I love that, where it's like, yeah, she could maybe she's be good for a while, but eventually, all witches tend to usually end up becoming bad because they're kind of forced to be.
Yeah, and because I also think ultimately it's kind of a little bit of the story too, well, as you don't always actually know who you're fucking with and the strength of that person, because again, there is that scene of her, kind of mothering Gretel into embracing these powers and, learning how to, channel her chakras or her energies or whatever to move things around and use her witchy powers, where ultimately Alice's character knows that the death of these children are only going to make her stronger, and ultimately that's what keeps her going. But by taking advantage of the maybe the insecurities or the educational purposes, kind of in the, the ideas of like, of like teachings, and taking advantage of somebody's, trust is ultimately what leads to the other kids' eventual demises. Because she's training Gretel and showing her all these cool tricks, kind of, almost trafficking style. And then you see that she ultimately knows she's still chained to a wall and going to be killed, and that's that. But her freeing herself ultimately just pissed her off, and she, flipped the script on Alice's witch character, that I was always incredibly strong. All you did was show me a few more tricks, and now I'm genuinely pissed at you. And so this is the way it's going to ultimately be. But it's a really, really cool movie, and I think it's just very cool concepts.
I kind of feel like, even though Gretel is kind of trained down, I think I don't think that the witch was going to kill her. I think that the only reason why she was kind of down was just to be able to keep her from interfering with Hansel being killed. She was all, and I kind of feel like that's why I like this version versus the actual Tell version of this, is that if in this movie, if it would have been a traditional Hansel and Gretel film where Gretel and Hansel are just regular children, I think the witch would have killed both of them regardless. Maybe would have kept that same homage and kind of, maybe not teach, obviously she wouldn't have taught her some of the witch stuff, but would have still kept her, kept the kids thinking that she was all good. I think it was ultimately because she, kind of like, with, witches know other witches, demons know other witches, vampires know there's other vampires. She knew, even though Gretel didn't know that she had witch powers, she always knew that she had extra sensory. She was able to sense things and dream things, and she knew things. So she knew she was a little bit different, but maybe didn't know that she was to the point where she had these powers as what would be a witch. And Alice's character, the witch, knew as soon as she first come in contact with her that, I mean, even like I said, even before they got to the house, because they're in this path and you kept seeing the witch in the woods periodically throughout the movie, kind of in the background the whole entire time, where she was kind of spying. I think like I said, I think if they would have just been two regular kids, that still would have, the cat and mouse still would have gone, and ultimately, but I think it's like, ooh, she was kind of intrigued with, like, maybe she hadn't had another scene out of all these kids that she's killed for all these centuries. None of them had any extra powers. They were all just normal regular kids, and then all of a sudden she has these two kids that are coming in the woods thinking that it's probably the same shit again, to ultimately going, wait, there's something different about this girl.
And I do think also ultimately one of the downfalls of Alice's decision making was the fact that she had Gretel tied up like crucifixion style, as opposed to finding a way to either lock her up or send her out for a chore or do something else that might have allowed the sacrificing of Hansel. But having Gretel, like, feeling that it's a wrap on her, it, could have been part of the ultimate demise of Alice Creek's character and the witch, because, you're, like I said, you've pissed her off and made her feel like this is a thing by not finding a way to, for lack of a better term, distract her so you can do away with her brother. Still might not end good for you, because Gretel's relationship to her brother still might be more important to her than her relationship to you. So it still might have ended up the same way. But I do think her being tied up that way with spears through her wrists and stuff like that is also ultimately not a good way to try to develop this potential young partnership, by having them see you in that way. But anyway, my friend, let's jump into the obituaries here, my friend. When it comes to Gretel and Hansel, like I said, look, I'm a big fan of this movie. Honestly, I'll keep it short and sweet. It's a high for me. It is a full-on solid 8 for me in this movie. I love the way it's shot. I love the acting. I love Beverly. I love Alice. I'm just drawing a blank on his name at the moment. With Hansel's character, although he was, kind of like almost like a third or fourth banana when it comes to the movie, I still think he did well. And ultimately, I really did enjoy, Osgood's vision of how this movie went, which ultimately leads, like we said, to movies like Longlegs, where, like Robert Eggers, he's got a very, very unique directing style that I think is setting us up for some real treats in the future. But I love the design. I love the storytelling. I like the way it's designed. And ultimately, I think this is a really, really fun, well shot, well executed movie. It is very budget friendly. You could definitely tell that they put some money behind this, but ultimately, I really think they did hit a home run. And while it's not the highest grade that we've given movies, or I've given movies on this show, I really think it deserves a high mark, and I do feel strongly about a solid 8 from myself.
Oh yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you too. Like I said before, with Snow and White, that version of Snow White, the Tale of Terror, has always been my favorite version of Snow White. And the same thing with this, man. Like, we haven't had as many versions of Hansel and Gretel, other than, like, actually we want to do the Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters with, with the Marvel heroes in the movie, and stuff
Nah,
like
we're
that.
cool. We don't need to do that.
Unless you want to consider that, but I mean, there hasn't been too many versions of it, other than your typical like cartoon versions that you've
Right.
seen throughout the whole entire time. But yeah, I ultimately think another one. I think this is another movie that like ultimately is probably my favorite thing, more than the comic, not comics, but the cartoon versions and the story versions and stuff like that. Because even the story version, I still think that the extra liberties that they did in this movie, where those changes that they made, I think ultimately made it a better movie, with the house not being that, with with Gretel not being a normal person. Because like I said, I mean, the whole story is like, you know, how do these two normal, this witch has killed millions of kids, in the story, and gets bested by these two kids all of a sudden, like, oh yeah, pushes her in, and it's okay, okay. This version kind of makes sense of why the witch got, she was kind of like one of those things that, like, maybe, yeah, you kind of, reap what you sow, you know what I mean? You try to, you're a witch, you feel this way, you hate your family so much, you assume that this girl is eventually going to learn your ways, and maybe, she sees how she's annoyed with Hansel sometimes and pushes him away sometimes, but not ultimately realizing that her love for Hansel is greater than anything the witch is going to give her, or, as far as like learning her powers. And that was her ultimate demise, was like, you know, the witch character has no love, where Gretel may be a witch now, but she still has that love. And that's, I think, and ultimately that's what wins in the end. So like I said, I like those little changes. Like you said, I love the way that this movie was shot. It's just, the eeriness, like I said, with the witches, and when they're walking around in the woods, the whole trip scene with the mushrooms, and just the house was just like this cool looking like house that didn't look like it was just like the the roof of the house a little bit. It's like, didn't seem, like the it's one of those ones where, like, you go into, or you see a movie where you go into, it's a trailer, and all of a sudden you go into it and it's this big huge mansion inside, where the house was a lot bigger than what it looks from the outside. So I like that. I love how, like I said, it's so darkly lit too, and it's enough light that there's only lights in parts that you need to see. You know what I mean? With the fire lighting all the time and things like that. It's just like, it's just, like I said, it's just well done. I mean, like I said, I mean, granted, yes, you know, production value is probably a lot higher than the Snow White one as far as their budget. It is a newer film versus, that film. So you had, technology is a little bit better now, and you can kind of, do a little bit more than you can. But like I said, ultimately, yeah, I mean, it's such a good movie, and such a cool visual movie that, like, yeah, there's no arguing. So I definitely, like you said, I mean, I have to agree, like, it's an 8 for me too.
Right on, man. Awesome. Fangs and Infernos, that's the way it's going to be. We're chiseling it into stone, and that is how it shall stand. Fatality. Victory to the vampire on this one, as with an 8. Gretel and Hansel takes out Snow White, A Tale of Terror, with a 7.5. This was a great one as always. The fairy tales were great, and it was a super cool in-depth. We really hope that you guys dug on this one. So again, we're giving the nod. We're giving the fairy tale magic wand, dap to Gretel and Hansel when it comes to this one. As always, myself and the devil want to thank our partners and sponsors. We really appreciate all the love and support that you guys give this show. And we'll be back. Horns up. Fangs out.
Devil, my friend, I think it's time that we spill the tea. Brutalities. Vampire and Devil podcast couldn't be more excited, more humbled to let you all know that we have partnered with very dear friends of ours for a long time in Brutalities. And there's so much great stuff, so many flavors, so much to enjoy, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about it. Isn't that right there, my friend?
Oh yeah, we like it hot. Of course the Inferno likes it hot. Do you like the hot tea? Well, you might as well get some brutality. Yeah, horror movies, puns, rock and roll. Brutality's got it all.
Absolutely. When it comes to the vampire, you know that he's going to absolutely gravitate towards that Nosferatu or that Nosferatu brew. Absolutely a favorite of mine. And we got to show a little bit love to, by all means, the biggest franchise in horror right now. That would be Terrifier. So Brutalities has brought you Terrifier. But that's just from the vampire. The devil has some favorites of his own.
Oh yeah, do you like the movie Pumpkinhead? Well, how about a little pumpkin bread for your throat holes? And like I said, with the rock and roll fans and the horror fans, Wednesday 13 fans, do you like Wednesday 13 and tea? How about a couple of those? With the Summertime Suicide and a couple other ones too. So if you like Wednesday 13 and you like the tea and you like the brutalities, go to the website.
Absolutely. And so, of course, we like to look out for those that look out for us. We love you, Fangs. We love you, Infernos. But as a courtesy from Brutalities to be bestowed on you, we have that Vampire and Devil coupon code, don't we, my friend?
Oh, yeah. You want to save a little dough, little cheddar, maybe buy some more shit? Go on the line, Brutalities, type in Vampire and Devil, and you get 10% off your order. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So it's getting into the chilly weather. People need to warm their bones. They need to warm what little skin they may or may not have. But Brutalities is the way to get it done. So that's the way it's going to be because Vampire and Devil said so. Horns up, fangs out for Brutalities.
Let's talk a little bit about our coffin. Pardon my curse, but I've just had a long, tiring day at work, and I was as well as this. I felt the need to connect a little piece before I talk to you about vampires, or pure, depending on the accent in which you speak. So basically, this gentleman is a vampire, which basically is what happens when a master of the night, a very, very high-ranking vampire, mates with a human woman and births a child. Now, this young man is actually traveling around basically conning people. So he calls himself a Dhampir, which is basically almost also like a vampire slayer to a certain degree, but it's also in that kind of ballpark of Blade, where it's like, you've got vampire powers, but you're also half human. So anyway, he's conning people by, trying to save their villages from, attacks of these evil monsters and stuff like that, not realizing that he actually is a Dhampir of himself. Now, at the time of his birth, he was actually protected from his father, who again was a master of the night and a very high-ranking vampire, because, they wanted to stop, one, the death of him, being that he is a Dhampir, so it's almost kind of like that mudblood type thing, or the ability for him to be like the right-hand man and train and get bigger and stronger, more powerful and more evil. So anyway, he's unaware of his past. And he basically gets recruited by a bunch of soldiers that are actually fighting for their lives when it comes to vampires. And he realizes little by little, based off the, the dreams that he has, these visions that he has, that he does have these powers, and learns that he is an actual Dhampir in real life. And he has to make his way to actually take out the Master of the Night that ended up taking out his father back in the day, or so it would seem. And he ends up, being able to harness some of his powers
do things the way that he wants to do as far as the execution of that said Master of the Night. Now, the interesting thing about it is it actually does lead to a sequel, which actually does have me very curious because I did like the ending. It had this very like Dracula undead touch of Nosferatu to it. So I did enjoy it overall. If there is a sequel, I actually would like to check it out because it also had this very cool kind of near dark feel to it. So I'm going to give it a solid 7 on this Coffin Nails for Vampire. Ghouls and Fangs, Vampire and the Devil here. We got a little question for you. Devil, there's kind of a triangle, a three-headed monster per se, when it comes to Baltimore, that I don't think people necessarily realize. We've got Edgar Allan Poe, we've got John Waters, but what else do we have?
We got the Ouija boards, oh yeah.
Absolutely. Starting in Baltimore way back in the day, a lot of people are unfamiliar with William Fuld and Elijah Bond, who patented, and the birth of the Ouija board was right here in Baltimore. Devil and Vampire coming at you from the Witchboard Museum of Baltimore, courtesy of our friend John Kozik, who invited us out to check it out and shoot a little conversation action to let you guys all know. Of course, you've seen on our socials that we have partnered with both museums, and we couldn't be more appreciative to John for that opportunity. So whenever you're here in Baltimore, of course, right attached to the Bazaar Oddity Shop off of the Avenue, you have Witchboard Museum Baltimore. And when you're in Witch City, USA, up in Salem, Massachusetts, that's when you get to visit the Salem Witchboard Museum.
Oh yeah, if you want to see some cool stuff, see some cool boards, get some cool history, go see our boy John. Man, that guy is really awesome, man. That dude knows his boards, he knows his history, he's about preserving the society of witch boards and the talking boards and all that goodness. And, you know, we love it. We love the fact that, you know, they were going to bring in this museum here in Baltimore, so all the Baltimore fans or all your East Coast fans are maybe not as far away, going up to Salem, come out to Baltimore and check it out, you know what I mean? Because there's some cool stuff in this museum, and you gotta check it out, because the devil and the vampire said so.
That is facts right there, my friend. Again, absolutely attached to the Bazaar Oddities shop in the Avenue in Hamden for the Baltimore established Witchboard Museum, or off of Essex Street in Salem, Massachusetts for the Salem Witchboard Museum. Horns up, fangs out.